And welcome to the 20th meeting of the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee and our first hybrid meeting. We have apologies today from Ross Greer, MSP, and Beatrice Wishart, MSP. However, I'm pleased to welcome Patrick Harvey, MSP, again to the committee as a substitute member for Ross. Before we begin, can I remind any members, witnesses and staff present that social distancing measures are in place in committee rooms and across the Holyrood campus. I also ask everyone to take care to observe these measures over the course of this morning's business, including when entering and exiting the committee room. I'd like to start by welcoming all the people in the committee room and also our members participating virtually. Can I also remind members not to touch the microphones and the consoles during the meeting? Our first agenda item today is evidence on immigration, and can I welcome to the meeting Ben Macpherson, MSP, Minister for Public Finance and Migration, and Rachel Sunderland, Acting Deputy Director, Population and Migration with the Scottish Government. I would remind those members participating virtually to give broadcasting staff a few seconds to operate your microphones before beginning to ask your question or to provide an answer, and I would be grateful if questions and answers could be kept as succinct as possible. Before we move to questions, can I invite the Minister to make a brief opening statement of no more than 2 or 3 minutes. Minister.
Thank you, Convener, and to all members of the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm mindful that this is the first time I have appeared before the committee to speak about migration, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss matters this morning. My predecessor, Alistair Allen, spoke to the committee back in March 2017 about migration, but there have been significant policy developments over the last 3 years. We are not perfect, but in the main, Scotland is a welcoming and inclusive nation, and we are a country which has been shaped by migration. In the past, this was predominantly by young people leaving Scotland to build a future elsewhere. We are shaped by their absence, while they have helped shape other countries across the world. However, I am pleased to state that the situation has changed. Scotland is now a nation of in-migration with a growing population. Over the last 20 years, Scotland has experienced positive net migration from the rest of the UK, the EU, and internationally of around 20,000 people per annum. Yet, as a nation, we still face significant demographic pressures. All of our future population growth is projected to come from migration. Firstly, that means we need people who are here to stay. At the end of this year, freedom of movement will end, and our message to EU citizens has always been clear. This is your home, you're welcome here, and we want you to stay. I recognise, however, that words alone are not enough. That is why we are committing more than £1 million to our Stay in Scotland campaign. This work has been supporting EU citizens during and beyond this transition period to continue living, working and studying in Scotland. And I continue to encourage as many stakeholders as possible to promote the Stay in Scotland campaign, including fellow MSPs, and I reiterate that request today. Secondly, Scotland has distinct migration needs, and we need a tailored approach to meet those needs. The Expert Advisory Group on Migration and Population has set out very detailed evidence about the impact of the UK Government's proposed immigration policies on Scotland's economy, population and communities. Their report, together with detailed evidence from the Scottish Government and employers across Scotland to the UK Government's Migration Advisory Committee, demonstrates very clearly why Scotland requires a tailored approach. Once free movement ends from January 2021, the UK Government intends to introduce a points-based immigration system. The Scottish Government has a range of concerns about their current policy positions, and so as part of providing constructive, viable, alternative solutions, the policy papers from the Scottish Government, Scotland's Population Needs and Policy Discussion Paper, which was published in February 2018, and Migration Helping Scotland Prosper, published in January 2020, set out clear evidence-based proposals for a tailored approach to migration for Scotland, including the introduction of a Scottish visa. The Scottish Parliament was established to enable the development of distinct solutions to distinct challenges. The Fresh Talent Programme, for example, introduced in 2005, was an instance where a tailored approach to migration for Scotland worked. We need an immigration system which meets Scotland's needs, and this means at all skill levels. Scotland, like many countries across the globe, is facing falling birth rates, and we will be dependent on inward migration to support our economy and our communities. It is in all of our interests that Scotland is able to attract the people that we need. I spent 2 years speaking to employers, local authorities, academics, trade unions, the private sector, public sector, elected members and individual members of the public and other individuals and organisations about how we develop proposals together that meet the requirements for Scotland in the short, medium and longer term. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss these proposals and matters today with the committee. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr McPherson, for those opening remarks. This committee, like the government, has spent a long time looking at Scotland's migration challenges. Indeed, previous reports have recommended that Scotland should have the powers to take a tailored approach to its migration needs. And I note that in the Scottish Government's evidence to the MAC consultation published on the 31st of August, you provided evidence of recruitment needs in areas, particularly key sectors like tourism, hospitality, culture and creative industries, as well as health and social care. Obviously, since the beginning of the year, we've experienced the pandemic, which has had profound economic effects, particularly in some of those areas like tourism and hospitality and culture, where the needs in terms of labour and talent were greatest. And now we're facing mass unemployment in those areas. Has the Scottish Government made any calculation about the long-term effects of COVID on our migration needs, and do you intend to revise some of the work that you've done already to take account of the post-COVID economy?
This extremely important question, Convener, and one that I've been very mindful of in recent weeks and months in particular. Of course, the figures that we have at this point to base our analysis on, the latest figures, for example, from December 2019, stipulate that there are 222,000 non-UK workers in the Scottish economy, 69,000 of which are classified as key workers. So that gives us an indication as to the contribution and the important contribution that those who've come and made Scotland home make to our economy and to key aspects of our economy that have obviously made a hugely important contribution during the pandemic period. How we assess the impact in terms of the needs of the economy when it comes to immigration, we will, as you would expect, analyse the next set of statistics in that context and consider how that affects both our short-term need but also our overall immigration requirements. However, I would strongly caveat that in the following. We want the Scottish economy to respond and recover and to continue on a growth trajectory out of this crisis. And for industries like tourism and a number of the other key sectors that are highlighted in our submission to the MAC of the 31st of August, we want those industries to come back strongly, and that's in our interest together. I mean, if you take, say for example, the food and drink sector in Scotland, they were projecting that they would require 40,000 additional workers to meet the productive capacity and the demand that there was in that sector pre-COVID crisis. We want those industries to come back just as strongly and for that economic growth to be achieved in the short to medium term, and that will require people. So the need for people is still strong. There are also industries that have continued to struggle to recruit through the pandemic and have relied on the migrant workforce, for example, in our agricultural sector in terms of realising the yield of the harvest this year. We still required migrant labour to assist us with that, for example. And of course, the contribution that the migrant workforce makes to the social care sector is profound and extremely important. And that will continue to be a very important issue going forward in terms of the recruitment within that sector, and also making sure we value those who are in that sector. And that's why we're very concerned that social care, recruitment within social care is going to be extremely challenged because of the salary thresholds that the UK government are proposing to bring forward from January. I would also emphasise that the demographic position, because, as I said, all of Scotland's projected growth in population is from inward investment, and there's no natural growth projected. So the portion of the population or of pensionable age is projected to increase, rising from 19% to 22.9% by mid-2043. But over the same period, the proportion of the population in Scotland of working age is projected to decline from 64.1% to 62.4%. So without migration, the sustainability of our working age population is extremely worrying, and that is one of many reasons, including the wider enrichment of our society by migration as a whole, that the Scottish Government continues to emphasise the need for continued inward migration in Scotland, and that the pandemic and the impacts of the pandemic on the labour market do not distort or undermine the key necessity for Scotland to continue to attract people and bring people here.
I see. Thank you very much. And social care is obviously a matter of great interest to committee members, and I know that some members will be coming back and asking you for more detail on that later. I wanted to ask you my second question with regards to your relationship with the UK government on these matters. When the Secretary of State for Scotland gave evidence to the committee in March this year, he acknowledged that some sectors will face workforce challenges resulting from Brexit. In fact, he said yesterday, Jackson Carlo and I met the Prime Minister. I spoke about the challenges of migration in relation to hospitality, tourism and seasonal agriculture workers. I will not go into detail because it's a work in progress, but I'm sure we will come up with a solution for those industries. Do you think they have come up with a solution for those industries? And can I ask how the Scottish Government has been able to influence the development of the UK's policy, and what intergovernmental arrangements exist to discuss immigration policy?
Thank you. In terms of proposals forthcoming from the UK Government, our understanding is that much of the focus of the UK Government is on the shortage occupation list, and perhaps we can talk about that more later in the committee, but there have been challenges thus far with the shortage occupation list in that it has not been agile enough, and the Scottish Government does not have a direct route in on behalf of Scottish stakeholders and the wider interests of Scotland to inform and influence the shortage occupation list. Apart from proposals to evolve the shortage occupation list, there have been no forthcoming solutions from the UK Government. However, I wish to engage with the UK Government and to work as constructively and collaboratively as we can on this issue. And I would just emphasise that since coming into post, I have very much taken a solution focused on these points and on immigration as a whole, because I think it's in the wider interests of all of Scotland and and both the reserved and the devolved government for this issue to be approached in a way that is beneficial to the wider interests of the Scottish economy and society. Unfortunately, the last time I met with the UK Government Minister was in July 2019. It was actually my birthday, that's why I remember, 23rd July 2019, and that was with Caroline Noakes, who, to her credit, despite policy differences, had established a regular, or certainly a fairly regular, engagement with myself and the other devolved administrations. However, the breakdown in that since the Johnson government came to power has been unfortunate, to put it mildly, and very disappointing given the importance of these issues. I have written now 7 times to the various different ministers in post, Brandon Lewis twice, Seema Kennedy, Kevin Foster 3 times, including just recently in August 2020, and Priti Patel, asking for a meeting since July 2019, and have had no positive responses, not So I've had some responses in writing, but no positive responses to a meeting, no phone calls, nothing. I think it's astonishing and deeply disrespectful to the devolution process that an issue as important as immigration has not been engaged with by the UK government, who in other areas of government policy, do have at least some regularity of intergovernmental exchange, and I would encourage them and urge them to engage with myself and my Welsh and Northern Irish counterparts on these very important issues. Of course, you also asked, Convener, about what have we done to try and influence UK government policy. We have, of course, commissioned and presented detailed evidence to the UK government, so from the expert advisory group and also Scottish Government analysis. And we have, of course, developed proposals, as we did in our January Migration Helping Scotland Prosper policy paper, around how tailored migration could work for Scotland, and put forward a range of constructive solutions for the UK government to engage with us on in a discussion around how to come up with solutions that work for the Scottish economy and wider Scottish society and help us meet our short, medium and longer term challenges. So I will continue to be constructive and continue to seek dialogue, but we really need the UK government to come to the table on this, and it's in all of our interests that they do.
Thank you very much. That's very worrying indeed that you've tried on 7 occasions to contact the UK government. This committee, in its previous reports, was quite unanimous in calling for bespoke Scottish solutions and constructive engagement around those bespoke Scottish solutions. So it is a disappointment to hear that that constructive engagement hasn't been forthcoming. I'll now pass to Claire Baker, the Deputy Convener.
Thank you, Convener. The Minister talked about the Migration Helping Scotland Prosper document that was published in January. And he will be aware, as he's outlined, the response to the UK government at the time was very disappointing, but was quite a strong response in that they will not introduce regional salary thresholds or different arrangements. It was a document that was dismissed fairly quickly by the UK government. So I don't want to ask a wee bit more about that status of that document. Is it still, because there was an immediate shutdown from the UK government, is it still a document that you're attempting to engage with the UK government on? And when I'm looking at the document, I'm trying to ask for too technical an answer, but it is still at a fairly high-level policy discussion. And I struggle to see what would actually have to be devolved, what the actual pieces of legislation, what would need to change at a UK government level. Now, it might just be that work is too technical to go into at the moment because we've not got an acceptance that it would happen. But is someone kind of doing the work on the 3 options? We have 5 options, options 2 through to 4, which are the level of devolution within a UK framework. Who's doing the work on what would actually need to be changed in terms of reserves and responsibilities, or what legislation would have to be amended?
Thank you. We have, since before the 2020 paper was published, so even considerations around the 2018 paper, we were thinking around what legal mechanisms and what changes in primary legislation at Westminster would be required. So we'd require primary legislation to devolve any power to this Parliament. The reason we presented the propositions and the 5 different models in the 2020 paper in the way that we did was to come with good faith to the UK government with a range of different options that would be achievable and practically implementable, so that we could start a discussion in order to do that in good faith and to allow them to consider the different options and for us to then have a dialogue in a mature way between governments. The fact that the paper was dismissed on the floor of the House of Commons before UK ministers would have had a chance to discuss it in detail was highly disappointing. We continue to push the document and the proposals within it to UK government because they are practical solution-focused proposals, but also They are proposals that I discussed with stakeholders across Scotland, from business to the third sector to public service providers across a range of different industries. So we put those propositions forward on behalf of and for the benefit of all of Scotland, not the Scottish Government in itself. So we believe there's wide consensus, and of course there was the Salvation poll in June, which showed that 59% of the Scottish public through the polling believe that Scotland should be able to set its tailored immigration policies. So there's wide-ranging support. The reason that the different models. So there would require primary legislation at Westminster to devolve any powers to the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament. And the reason we propose models 3 and 4 in particular is because that would enable the Scottish Parliament to feed into the rules and criteria of the visa, of the mechanism, in order to meet the needs of the Scottish people, but also to give that democratic accountability. And the reason we propose models 3 and 4 as well is it would give a greater degree of stability, because if there was devolution, then this Parliament could set we would hope, prolonged position that would give us that greater sense of longevity in our policy making, which is what we need to tackle the demographic challenges that we have. So, and then of course with models 1 and 2, there is capacity for the UK government to deliver those to an extent through things like the shortage occupation list, if they did it well, and responded to the criticisms and challenges that they've been in the shortage occupation list historically, and also they could use their points-based system to give more weighting to people coming to Scotland. So there are solutions that they could utilise, but the reason we believe that power should come here is because it would be more democratic, and it would be more beneficial in the long term, and it would allow us to have that greater degree of flexibility and capacity to set tailored solutions. But we kept it broad to have a conversation while we are quite clear in what we believe would be the best way to proceed in a UK framework.
Now, while I think there is a degree of consensus in the Parliament around the need for a tailored response, we have had parliamentary debates on it, the issues that the UK Government could be concerned around is a porous border. How would you introduce a system? I know the Scottish Government's interested in linking it to the tax code. How would, and then who would police a system? Would it be because I think you've said before it would be the UK Government, the expectation would be they would police any kind of system, and it would be their responsibility to deal with issues of if people had concerns around a porous border.
First of all, I should say that what's really interesting about the latest report from the Expert Advisory Group is that it addresses the misnomer that people come to Scotland to go to England. And actually, the evidence is that more people stay in Scotland and settle in Scotland, and that's what we want. And I think it's worth looking at that data and that analysis. In terms of enforcement, of course, we think about this, and that's why our approach is for the UK Government and the Scottish Government would have to work collaboratively on the implementation of a Scottish visa of tailored solutions, because short of Model 5, which is full separation of powers and policy to the Scottish Parliament, whether through full devolution or independence, the models 3 and 4 and potentially 1 and 2 as well, there would be an onus on the Home Office to still play a role in enforcement, and we would be in a position where existing enforcement would be the default in terms of how this would be managed within the business community and in society. So, for example, we believe the Scottish Tax Code and the fact that we have the Scottish Parliament are the institution and one of the key mechanisms for enabling the delivery of a Scottish visa. So employers would only be able to hire someone on a Scottish visa if they had a Scottish tax code, and that would be part of the process in issuing the visa would be the issuing of a Scottish tax code, and that would require, of course, engagement between Scottish Government, Home Office and the Treasury as well. DWP. So how the institutions work together would be a discussion that we would have to have as part of the process of devolution and implementation. I mean, of course, we already have public service checks for the immigration system as is. And I should say as well that we propose the Scottish visa and tailored solutions as an additional way into Scotland. So employers could still look to the 5 tiers of the current system if that was their preference. But if they just needed somebody to work in Scotland, then a Scottish visa would be a potential additional solution. And the delivery of that using the Scottish tax code would give it the differentiation within the system. But in terms of whether, I presume you're saying your question is considering an instance where, for example, somebody might then go from Scotland to seek to work in England. Well, they wouldn't be able to seek legal employment in England because they'd only have a Scottish visa and Scottish tax code as part of that. So that's, unless, if the concerns are about illegal employment, then that's an issue in itself that the wider state continually needs to address generally. I don't think that's an argument against the Scottish visa. And I would just also emphasise that it's about somebody living in Scotland too. So somebody could work for a Scottish company using a Scottish visa in, say, logistics and drive elsewhere in the UK, but then would be employed by a Scottish logistics company and would live in Scotland. I don't know if you want to say any more on that, Rachel.
The only thing I wanted to add is that it is already a feature of the immigration system that there are visas which place controls over where people can work. So that is already embedded within the system. What we are talking about is making that a geographical control rather than an employer control. So we're not talking about a significant shift in terms of how the kind of system is already set up.
Exploring the issue, that was what I was looking for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now bring in Annabel Ewing, followed by Oliver Mundale.
Thank you, Convener. I regret to say that I missed a bit of the discussion because I had computer problems, but hopefully I'm not repeating anything that's been specifically addressed. Returning to the issue of the UK Government's response to the options paper put forward by the Scottish Government earlier this year, when the UK Government Secretary of State for Scotland was before our committee in early March, I did try to get to the bottom as to whether there had been any written detailed analysis by the UK Government of the options paper put forward. And I didn't really get any clear response. From the responses I did get, both from the Minister and from his officials, it appeared to me to be reasonable to conclude that there had been no written analysis at all. I just wonder, what is the Minister's understanding of the situation here?
Thank you. We have not had a detailed response on our proposals that is in any way thoughtful or evidence-based. And I say that with great disappointment in that we have worked collaboratively and constructively with stakeholders across all of Scotland to build a solution-focused approach that puts forward practical solutions for issues that influence us all, and that the UK Government, if it cares about, one, designing an immigration system that works for the whole of the UK, and two, the sustainability of Scottish society in terms of our demographics and the performance of our Scottish economy, then they should be engaging constructively on this. And it seems to be an ideological position from the UK government that it won't entertain, as things stand, the opportunity and the possibility of tailored approaches for Scotland, which I think is a mistake from their behalf based on the evidence, but also in that we are putting forward solutions here that work for the wider interest. And it is quite bemusing but deeply disappointing for me that there has been such a dismissive approach when, you know, other countries do this very well and sensibly, particularly Canada and Australia, where they recognise that in different parts of the nation state, different areas have different challenges. And the homogenous nature of the UK government immigration system just does not work for the wider benefit of the UK as a whole. Different areas have different challenges. Now, sometimes when I state that, people put the argument to me, well, what about the northwest of England and the northeast of England? They have some similar challenges. And they do, but those challenges aren't as acute as Scotland's because of our story of immigration in the past and because we have our remote and island communities which we want and wish to sustain. But also the northwest and the northeast of England, just to take them as examples, they don't have an institution like the Scottish Parliament to deliver something different, whereas we do. We have a Parliament, a government, a tax code, various institutions. So practically we are set up through the devolution settlement in a way that would allow us to implement something, tailored solutions that would work. So the UK government is being, I think, ideological on this, not logical, and it makes eminent sense to more and more people in Scotland and more stakeholders that tailored solutions will not only be beneficial but will become increasingly required when freedom of movement ends and the new immigration system that the UK government envisages coming into force from January 2021 begins to take hold, because that much more restrictive environment will make it much more challenging for employers to obtain the people they need to prosper and succeed.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and would just say that it is eminently sensible to have tailored solutions for different challenges. And indeed, the Minister cited international precedent, and I just wonder, therefore, to what extent the UK government can be considered by any reasonable person to be acting in the interests of the people of Scotland on this matter. And I just wonder if the Minister would comment on whether he feels that the UK government's non-response in terms of any detail to a perfectly reasonable position paper displays an extreme discourtesy to the Scottish government and indeed to the people of Scotland, and suggests indeed that the so-called respect agenda promised if we voted no in 2014 simply doesn't exist.
I think the response to our proposals does deeply undermine and question the so-called respect agenda and the fact that there's been no intergovernmental interaction on such an important issue since July 2019, despite my writing now 7 times for a meeting, is demonstrative of the lack of respect. And it's a position that I don't think is sustainable for the UK government because the arguments for tailored solutions are compelling, and they will become more compelling from January 2021. And the range of organisations, from the business community to other parts of Scottish society and those who deliver public services, the range of support that there is now, including in the public realm, for tailored solutions is growing all the time. and for the UK government to ignore that on a longer term basis, I just don't think is a tenable position and not a sensible position. We are trying to come forward with solutions and proposals for the benefit of all, and I would urge the UK government to listen to the constructive way in which myself and my colleagues are putting forward these propositions, not just on behalf of the Scottish Government, but representing wide-ranging concerns and aspirations for tailored solutions.
Thank you very much. Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Convener. I think no one's disputing the need for solutions and creative thinking across immigration, but to try and pretend that this is a constructive approach when it's yet another example of the Scottish Government refusing to recognise the constitutional settlement in the United Kingdom and another attempt to further the cause of independence, I think is disingenuous, and I think it shows exactly why the UK Government's right to continue to pursue a points-based system that works well in other countries. I note that the Ministers talked a lot about stakeholders, but why are organisations like the CBI still in favour of finding a UK-wide solution to prevent disruption for businesses?
So I would challenge Mr Mundell's assertions and ask what evidence he has behind his questioning.
Well, on the CBI's position, they've said it's not too late to find a UK-wide solution. So why would they want that if it was in the best interest of businesses in Scotland to go down what would be quite a disruptive approach at a critical point as we leave the EU?
Well, actually, for clarity, I was alluding to the points you made around the way in which the Scottish Government has approached this issue. It's been quite clear, and the fact that our policy paper proposes different models and advocates for models 3 and 4 rather than 5, I think is demonstrative of the fact that we have actually tried to reach a compromise position here for the wider benefit of Scotland to try and improve the immigration system for the UK as a whole, actually, and relay our concerns about it as a whole, but particularly with regard to Scotland. And it's clear on the evidence that the policy proposals from the UK Government due to be implemented from January 2021 will have a significant effect, both on the short to medium term economic position, but also in the longer term in terms of our demographics. You know, the CBI, I've had really good engagement with the CBI, and we've listened to each other. And actually, the CBI have not ruled out support for tailored proposals for...
Proposals would be better operate, that the system would be better run and managed at a UK level, is that correct?
So they have said, and of course the CBI are one of a range of business organisations, not the only one.
Quite an important one.
Would you like me to answer the question? So CBI have said that they are open-minded about, I need to find their quote in exact terms in a moment, but they have said that they are not dismissive of the propositions of a tailored approach. They would like to see the UK immigration system as a whole work better. However, they are not in support of what have been proposed by the UK Government for January 2021, and both at a Scottish level and at a UK level, indeed, they have raised their concerns about the policy proposals. So I think it's wrong of you to insinuate that the CBI are not open-minded about tailored solutions. They haven't come out in categorical support of it, and I'm not saying that they have, but the engagement I've had with the CBI and what they've said publicly is that they are not dismissing the idea, but they want to see the UK Government system improve across the UK, as do we in the Scottish Government. But we also think that in the longer term, and for the benefit of the delivery of effective immigration solutions for the challenges we face, but also the longer term demographic position of Scotland, a tailored system, just like they have in Canada and Australia, which are modern countries which have reasonable approach, considering that there are different needs and different aspects. The homogeneous nature of the UK government immigration system has not been effective till this point, and certainly a more restrictive environment from January 2021 is not in the interests of Scotland, and indeed not in the interests of the business community, and they have made that very clear.
Well, I feel you're trying to misrepresent now what I said, and I was looking for a very simple clarification. Is it correct that the CBI's position is a UK-wide immigration policy that works for the whole of the UK would be their preference? Is that correct?
Well, they've said that the proposals from January 2021 are not
That's
policy
not a question,
position.
to be fair. Is their preference a UK-wide system, yes or no?
They have said that they would like to see changes to what the UK government are proposing for the UK system, and they have been open-minded in their engagement with me on the possibility of tailored solutions. I don't want to speak from the CBI because I don't think that's fair or appropriate, and also their comments are, you know, I would want to seek an updated position from them as we haven't engaged on this issue for a number of weeks. But, you know, I would also draw attention to Mr Mandel of what other business organisations have said. For example, the FSB, who have said, we have argued that there should be a system in Scotland which responds to the particular needs of Scottish industry and demography. The SCDI supports greater flexibilities on immigration for Scotland to respond to its distinct demographic and employment needs. Other countries successfully operate regional migration schemes which target the specific needs of their economies, and SCDI believes that there are workable options for more differentiation in the UK system. And a number of other institutions have come forward with support. But I think it's important to emphasise that the business community understands that from a practical solution-focused position, there is much merit in considering and exploring together how tailored solutions could work better than the current homogenous approach.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I mean, this far into the discussion, I'm afraid I feel rather the same way I do in the Finance and Constitution Committee at the moment, where we're talking about the internal market, the continuity bill, the prospective trade agreements. And there, you know, even with the best will in the world, if both governments wanted to cooperate and meet together and discuss properly, they appear to have fundamentally at odds objectives. And that seems to be the situation here. The UK government wants to significantly reduce immigration, operates a hostile environment, and is ending free movement in order to achieve that objective, whereas the Scottish government welcomes immigration, values it, and doesn't want to turn off the taps in that way. So, you know, I would ask you to expand on what level of dialogue, if any, there has been in the last 6 months, because the meeting Annabel Ewing, the committee meeting Annabel Ewing referred to in March, the Secretary of State of Scotland said, yesterday Jackson Carnell and I met the Prime Minister. I will not go into detail because it's a work in progress, but I'm sure we'll come up with a solution. So, you know, there was a cunning plan in the works, but from what you were saying to the convener earlier, it sounds as though it hasn't actually been announced, and I'm unclear whether there's been any dialogue at all between the two governments. Has there been dialogue on this cunning plan that was in the works in March? And if there is dialogue, is it even possible to get a solution that meets both governments' objectives, or are they fundamentally at odds?
There's not been any dialogue in person or in an online format, unfortunately. I say that, as I said earlier, I did receive a written response from the Minister for Immigration on the 16th of June to one of the letters that I wrote, which particularly emphasised some of our determinations of how the immigration system should value those who've been engaged in responding to the COVID crisis, for example, urging the UK government not to increase the health surcharge, which unfortunately they are, and some commentary that we provided around our concerns around the EU settlement scheme, the lack of physical proof, the fact that people have to apply for pre-settled status, and then if they've not been here for 5 years and will then have to transition to settled status, and the fact that their rights still aren't guaranteed in primary legislation, and that a declaratory system would have been a much better approach. All these points that we've been making for some time, that was relayed by myself and responded to on the 16th of June in writing by the UK government, but at that point they did not agree to my constructive request for a meeting, and it's just astonishing, I think, that on an issue of this importance the UK government are not showing both the respect and good sense to engage.
Minister's never met with you?
I've not met an immigration minister since the last government, the May government.
Home Secretary's never met with you?
The Home Secretary, no, and not with the Cabinet Secretaries either.
Moving on then, clearly there is, a dysfunctional intergovernmental relationship on a number of fronts and an unwillingness, I think more on the part of the UK government, an unwillingness to resolve that. No doubt others might blame the Scottish government, but it does seem to be that you're the ones asking for meetings and being rebuffed. If that situation continues to persist, we still have to look at the internal domestic impact of this if the UK government does have its way and deepens the hostile environment and reduces immigration. Your advisory group contained mostly academic and economic experts. What input has, for example, COSLA had in terms of the impact on local government services? What impact has the care sector or the NHS had on the impact on those increasingly vital public services if that reduction in immigration does happen? And if we see the UK government continue with its plans as they are at the moment, is there any scope for the Scottish government to be more successful at attracting from within whatever amount of immigration does remain permitted to the UK, more successful at attracting some of that talent and energy to come to Scotland? I wouldn't wish that we were competing with other parts of the UK for that. I wish all of our borders were open, frankly. But if we are forced to compete for a declining pool of inward talent, what more can we do to ensure that Scottish public services and others who need that talent can benefit from it?
So just firstly on the points about engagement, since I came into post I've met with stakeholder representatives across the different industries and sectors in Scotland, from social care and local government to all different aspects of our economy, and built that regular engagement and official engagement, which I'll let Rachel speak to in a moment, is regular and extensive, both with COSLA on behalf of local government, but also with, say, for example, Scottish Care or different business organisations that discussed with Mr Mundell. So we are in regular engagement to make sure that, yes, we hear the evidence, which is independent from our expert advisory group. We commission what we'd like them to examine, but their analysis is independent and their conclusions are independent, and we really value that. But as well as the expert advisory group, we are constantly involved in stakeholder engagement in the round, and actually our submission to the shortage occupation list was an amalgamation of our expert advisory group evidence and analysis and engagement, but also our wider stakeholder engagement. In terms of how do we continue to remain attractive, I think that is the most important question, and that we are in an environment where we're leaving the European Union, which makes it easier for people to go to other parts of the EU if they're looking for work and opportunities and to utilise their skills for the common good. So we're in that environment where it's more difficult to come to the UK, and certainly will be from the 31st of December this year. But also we're in an environment where the UK government is sending out messages that it's more difficult to come to the UK, and that effectively they don't want more people to come here. And it's clear that that's the messaging from the hostile environment policy making and the positions from the UK government. But also we're in an environment where, in the international sense, including in Europe, where other countries are facing demographic challenges too and looking to attract people and retain people in their nations. So we are doing all that we can both to continue to attract people from Europe. So our Scotland is Open campaign that went across many countries in Europe. It was very successful in terms of the reach it had, particularly on social media, just emphasising that message over and above UK government statements that Scotland is somewhere that we still want people to come here. We, of course, had our campaign in London and other parts of the UK related to our Scotland is Now positioning in order to attract people from the rest of the UK, and we'll continue to look to do that. But we're also, an expert advisory group report that came out last week emphasised this, in a position where we're receiving net migration from the rest of the UK. So we're in a positive place and we want to improve that. In terms of the
programme... Can I ask about one specific?
Sure, sure.
When we had the settled status scheme for EU citizens, the Scottish Government was, before the costs were scrapped, was willing to say, we'll help people meet those costs. Have you done any work to look at whether it would be financially beneficial for Scotland to meet some or all of people's visa costs under a new system in order to attract people to work here who would then obviously become Scottish taxpayers?
That's not a proposition that we have scoped out in the analysis that we'd need to apply to that at present. Of course, we continue to also emphasise that the fee regime, both in terms of the fees that are needed to be paid by individuals, employers and family members, and the health surcharge as well, is extremely prohibitive. So we continue to emphasise that the fee levels are something that should change, and the UK government should change. We are in the development of a Welcome to Scotland initiative. Some of that had to be paused because of the COVID crisis, but it's up and running again. In terms of how we take that forward, it's a commitment in the PFG for this year, and how that package both supports individuals when they come here and continues to play a role in attracting individuals and talent, and of course talent.
Can you assure us that part of that work will involve looking at whether it would be beneficial for Scotland to help meet some of the people's costs in order to attract them to become Scottish taxpayers?
I certainly give Mr Harvey an undertaking that we will take that idea from today's committee and give it due consideration. Rachel, do you want to add anything on those points?
I think the only thing that I was going to add is that there are obviously constraints in terms of what we can and can't do, particularly in relation to payment of things like visa fees, in terms of the kind of allocation and operation in relation to reserved issues. So we have done a little bit of work at looking at some of those kinds of issues. It does raise some very complicated issues, which we would need to explore a bit further, but it is not entirely straightforward.
I appreciate that, but I gather it's now acceptable to break the law in specific and limited ways, so perhaps we could look again.
Thank you very much. Stuart McMillan, followed by Dean Lockhart. Stuart.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister. Minister, I listened intently to the contribution that you had with Oliver Mundell. And so Mr Mundell had indicated that things are working well. Well, I certainly don't recognise that in the area that I represent. Certainly since 1979, my area has been decimated in terms of population, thanks to Mr Mundell's party when they came in and they closed the shipyards, closed the heavy engineering, and people had to leave to go and find work. And as the Minister will remember, Mr Tibbett's comments of get on your bike. So people did. As I said, we've lost over 30,000 people in the Inverclyde area. And the NRS figures going from 1998 to 2019 are not positive reading, and certainly projections continue that in terms of the demographic challenge that an area like mine actually has. So when you mentioned earlier regarding a tailored approach, and also you mentioned the population strategy that was announced in the PFG last week, will there be a tailored approach within Scotland for that particular report and piece of work that the Scottish Government are going to undertake?
Thank you. How we not just attract people to Scotland, but consider depopulation and migration trends within Scotland as a whole is, as you would expect, of real pertinence to our analysis in the round, and was why Fiona Hislop set up the Ministerial Population Task Force last year in order to look across government in terms of devolved competence as to how we assess and intervene, if appropriate, with regard to internal migration challenges. So, you know, there are a number of aspects to devolved policy making that can help make an impact, make a difference when it comes to trying to tackle depopulation in different parts of Scotland. And the commitment in the PFG will analyse that and present it to Parliament and solutions as well as analysis. I would say that the pandemic has emphasised, you know, the potential for digital to really assist in some of these challenges, and that people will be able to live in one place and work in another in a much more amenable way if we embrace more home working and the real opportunities of digital that have been accelerated. It's one of the very, very few positives of the COVID-19 situation. Is the development of digital usage and use of digital technology. I would just argue as well that if we were successful in working with the UK government to have the ability for this Parliament to be able to deliver tailored solutions for Scotland, one area that we could look at together as a Parliament is how we would be able to use those powers to potentially weight the position of the Scottish visa in favour of individuals moving to different parts of Scotland and not just Scotland as a whole. But that would require a degree of flexibility within whatever arrangement we came to. So there's a lot of scope for action, particularly if we had more powers and the ability to implement tailored solutions, but the government is also actively looking with the powers that we do have as to how we try with what means are achievable by this institution to make a difference in that regard. Do you want to add anything, Rachel, to that?
I was just really going to add that one of the things that we are committed to looking at, that we have commissioned the expert advisory group to work up some proposals around, would be kind of rural migration pilots. So looking at the opportunity to take a slightly more tailored solution, and that was something which arose from evidence which the Scottish Government presented to the Migration Advisory Committee, that the Migration Advisory Committee accepted, that it was clear that the current migration system was not working for some areas, and therefore more geographically tailored solutions were required there. And that is something that we are going to take forward and look at specifically and bring forward a proposal as to what that might look like, and we'll be looking to do that on the basis of evidence and also in partnership with local government and other partners.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'm happy to have some input into that because my area is one of the worst in terms of population. Kenny Gibson's is not far behind. If you look from certainly from 1998, East Lothian has had a 21% increase in population. Inverclyde has 9.4% decrease. So clearly, the system, the immigration system as it currently is not working for my area in any way, shape or form. And I accept as well, this isn't just about government, this is about all levers of of public responsibility, local authorities too. There has to be a full partnership approach to try to turn this type of situation around. But I think that the idea regarding the homeworking and also with the use of the digital activity, that certainly could be positive for areas like mine, and also the 8 local authority areas where there has been population decline. I think just in terms of a question for you though, in terms of government policy and activities, if there are going to be any new agencies to be created and established, could the 8 local authorities, but particularly also the one I would pitch for would be mine, could they be considered to be first for that type of tailored strategy? Because that could be a way of helping to bring additional people and also kind of resource into those local authorities that have got those acute challenges.
I mean, in the round, of course, government thinks about how government institutions create employment and how that would be how the establishment of different institutions across the country and how that's dispersed, and trying to do that in a way that is considerate of creating employment opportunities and depopulation issues. With regard to if there was, say, for example, a Scottish Migration Agency where that would be located, I think it would be presumptuous of me to engage in that at present. But it's an interesting topic to raise because there, and we talk about this in the January paper, Migration Helping Scotland Prosper, is that the establishment of the Social Security Agency and the way that the Social Security Act was taken through Parliament as an enabling act for delivering those powers is an interesting precedent for how we could deliver tailored immigration policies for Scotland, in that the Social Security Agency is working with the DWP. We would have to work with the Home Office. The Scottish Government took a position and the Parliament agreed with it to set up an agency rather than a government department. And of course, one of the big challenges around the Home Office is that as a government department, it's not necessarily performing in the way that people who access the system would wish it to, and an agency may be a better approach. This is the sort of analysis that we would, of course, undertake in a robust and serious way before making decisions about how to deliver tailored migration policies for Scotland. But a lot of opportunity to do things in an agile way and in a more effective way. And taking inspiration from the way the social security powers are being delivered. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now move to Dean Lockhart, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson. Mr. Lockhart.
Thank you very much, Convener, and good morning, Minister. There's wide consensus that the COVID crisis provides an opportunity to reshape Scotland's economy, and you mentioned yourself about the growth of digital and the adoption of new technologies, whereas at the same time there are sectors of the economy that will see very high unemployment. So to address this reshaping of Scotland's economy, there's going to be a massive need for reskilling the workforce across Scotland, which will have to sit alongside immigration policy. So I wonder if the Minister can explain the Scottish Government's approach to that massive need to reskill Scotland's workforce and how it sits alongside immigration policy. Because just to highlight the scale of the challenge, before COVID, the training participation rate in Scotland for 25 to 39-year-olds was only 12%. So that highlights the scale of the challenge in terms of the reskilling required for the workforce and how overall that will interact with the Scottish Government's immigration policy.
Thank you, Mr. Lockhart, and some really important questions. I would refer Mr. Lockhart to the initiatives in the PSG around the commitment to reskilling and providing resource behind that, and the work that Mr. Hepburn in particular is taking forward in that regard. The circumstances in which COVID has created in terms of the downturn in the economy and the impact on some of our key sectors, like, for example, tourism, is of course pertinent to the immediate situation of the requirements in the labour market and the differentiation that there's been between the positioning in the end of last year, where unemployment was at such a low rate and demand for labour was so high. However, I would refer Mr Lockhart to my comments earlier on in today's session, where we want to get, obviously, we want to move to a position not just to reskill, but to, once we move through the COVID crisis, and appreciate there's uncertainties around how that will progress, but we as a collective should be determined to reach a position again where those industries are in the healthy state that they were previously, with the same perhaps increased demand, and we'll need people to fulfil that. But it doesn't. I can understand the logic of the question with regard to the immediate term, but I would also refer to the demographic challenge and the longer term aspects of the immigration question and the need to attract people to Scotland, and that if we are to sustain our working age population, we need migration. There's no doubts about that. The evidence is overwhelming. So from an economic perspective, and I think we should be arguing for immigration because of the wider enrichments it creates, not just from an economic perspective, but in the round. But from an economic perspective, in order to sustain our working age population, we are going to continue to need to bring people here. And that's across all skills. And of course, one of the big challenges with regard to the system that's coming into force from January is the salary threshold of 25,600, where in Scotland there are 53% of roles earn less than 25,000, and of most concern up to 90% in the social care sector, for example. So the need to continue to attract people to work in parts of the economy that still require and still have required and benefited from, to all of our good, the migrant workforce during the pandemic, will continue to need to attract people, and in the medium to longer term, in our recovery, we will continue to need to attract people, and in the longer term, we will need to attract people to meet our demographic challenges.
Thanks, Minister, for that response. And part of the reason for the question was to take some assurance from the Minister that there is a whole-of-government approach to the COVID crisis in terms of reskilling the economy and addressing the fact there will, he said in the short term, let's hope it is the short term, we will see unemployment in many sectors across Scotland. So it's reassuring that to hear from the Minister that there is an integrated approach in terms of training and immigration in this respect. I'd like to move on and address some of the discussions surrounding the new shortage occupation list, which has been compiled by the Migration Advisory Committee, which I believe is scheduled to be updated soon. I was looking at the most recent Tier 2 shortage occupation list, and the occupations listed as being in shortage comprised 34 occupations on a UK-wide level, with an additional 2 occupations for Scotland being on the shortage list. In other words, the occupational shortage needs of Scotland seem to be very similar to the rest of the UK. Does the Minister recognise the fact that the SOL, the list of occupations identified as being in shortage in Scotland and across the rest of the UK are actually very similar?
No, and I'll come back to shortly, but just with regard to your first question, I think it was such an important area, and you rightly emphasises the need for a coordinated approach across government. So perhaps if it'd be useful to Mr Lockhart and the committee, I would like to give an undertaking to write to the committee on those points, together with input from Mr Hepburn and his officials, just to make sure that we're providing you with as much on those important points as we can. So I hope that's helpful. With regard to the shortage occupation list, one of the real issues with the shortage occupation list is it's in the past, the process for revising and reviewing have not been agile and responsive to shifting needs, particularly in circumstances like the current context and other aspects that can change quite quickly. So the whole process of the shortage occupation list has not been effective historically. However, we want it to be better. So we've engaged in our submission and in our dialogue with the Home Office in good faith to try and improve it. And the proposals that we have put forward is that we think that there should be a process for reviewing the SOL to make sure that there's a formal role for the Scottish Government and Scottish ministers in determining the occupations that are in shortage in Scotland, because we don't think, and it was indicative in your question, Mr Lockhart, that we don't think that the SOL in its present form is representative of the shortages that there are. And we certainly don't think it will be representative following December, the end of December this year, into the new system, because of course one of the big worries and challenges about the new immigration system that's coming into force from January is that there will be no route for those earning less than £25,600 unless they're on the SOL. So the SOL will take on greater significance in that context, and we are need, as I said earlier, such a large portion of the workforce in Scotland is under that salary threshold. So we really need if the shortage occupation list is going to be in any way effective at addressing some of the challenges that the removing freedom of movement will create, then it needs to be improved. It's not a panacea though, and certainly will not be as effective or as beneficial as freedom of movement has been. But we want to make it better. So we want the Scottish Government to have a more direct, on behalf of Scotland and Scottish stakeholders, a more direct way of influencing the SOL and what's on the SOL for Scotland. But also we want the shortage occupation list to consider evolving the way it assesses shortages, in that instead of putting very specific job titles in the SOL, it could take more of a sectoral approach, for example, and be broader, which would be much more useful for employers. And that is indicative for example, the situation in health at the moment, where there are a number of different aspects like nurses, job titles like nurses, for example, and social workers are on the shortage occupation list, but care workers aren't. And I think that's indicative of some of the problems with it. I don't know if you want to say anything on that, Rachel.
I think that a number of stakeholders across Scotland have consistently provided evidence of what they see as shortages, and certainly the feedback that we get when we hear from stakeholders is often that they feel that it is very challenging in order to get jobs added to the shortage occupation list. If you look, for example, at something like Gaelic teachers, where there was an argument and evidence being provided by local authorities and COSLA for quite some time around shortages there. I think it was only last year that Gaelic teachers was added to the Scottish shortage occupation list. So I think stakeholders find it quite a challenging threshold in order to get across.
Thank you very much for that. And Convener, I just have a very brief follow-up, if that's okay. And at the risk of having a circular discussion, given the economic disruption expected over the next short term, possibly 1, 2, 3 years, and potential impact on free movement of people or movement of migration, has the Scottish Government looked at how reskilling can address some or many of those skill shortages in the next 12, 18, 24 months?
Well, I will take that away as part of the undertaking I gave to provide more from Mr Hepburn's position in writing, but I would also just emphasise that, you know, there are parts of the economy where no matter how hard employers try to recruit within the local geographic area, they just are unable to meet their demand and get people to take up the roles that are required. So it's not just as and I know that Mr Lockhart isn't proposing this, but it's not just as simple as reskilling or pushing those who are unfortunately facing unemployment because of the current COVID crisis into industries where there are vacancies. It's a much more complex scenario where employers are looking for specific, not just skills, but experience and commitment that the migrant workforce has been able to provide in a very welcoming way, both in terms of the productivity and the activity that they have contributed, and of course the net contribution that makes to the public finances and our GDP, and it's worth remembering that, but also the contribution that such individuals have made to the sustainability of rural communities, for example, and also the huge contribution that freedom of movement and EU migration has made in terms of our demographic position, where the amount of families that have come here has of course been incredibly welcome. So I think Mr Lockhart asks important questions around the relationship between immigration policy and the labour market in the current circumstances, and I'm very happy to give that undertaking to come back on some of those points with any more detail that we'll be able to provide the committee in due course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Convener,
I'm afraid we need to move on because you did take your third question, Mr Lockhart, so need to move on. Kenneth Gibson.
Population growth of any nation on earth in the 20th century, and huge levels of net out migration, averaging around 40,000 a year, which is why there's more Scots, more people of Scottish ancestry in Canada and America than there are here. Now, according to the National Records of Scotland, this has turned around somewhat. So whilst 80,600 people migrated in 2018 to Scotland, we still had 59,700 people leave. To put that in perspective, 51,308 live births that year was the second lowest since records began in 1855, and a total population of 5.438 million. So migration to Scotland is important, but does the Scottish Government accept that migration is only part of the story, and out-migration, particularly of the young, skilled and well-educated, remains a major issue, exceeding as it does our annual birth rate? So what, therefore, is the Scottish Government going to do to help retain people born and brought up in Scotland and address our abysmally low birth rate?
Thank you, Mr Gibson. I didn't hear the very beginning of your question, but I will seek to answer what I did hear. I think the points you raise around Scotland's story when it comes to migration in terms of outward migration is important for context, and also for how we understand why our demographics are reflected in the manner that we face right now. I would point to optimism in the first instance, in that the expert advisory group's most recent report published last week around migration within the UK. It was very encouraging to learn that that most people who arrive in Scotland are aged 18 to 29, and that there has been a positive contribution, a net positive contribution from the rest of the UK to Scotland over the last 20 years, reversing that trend of more people leaving to the rest of the UK than coming here. So we're in a more positive position than we were 2 decades ago, but there is more work to do. And part of that is absolutely about how we continue to attract, which has of course been the focus of the majority of our discussion this morning, but also retain. And I would agree that that's not just about how we do all that we can together to encourage EU citizens to stay and acquire their settled status before the end of June next year, but also to work collectively to encourage people to stay in Scotland after leaving school or graduation or different parts of their lives. And that, of course, is policy in the round, from questions on housing to education to quality of life and the well-being economy as a whole. And that's exactly what the Population Task Force will be looking at. What the Population Task Force has been looking at, but the population strategy that will be taken forward in the next year as a PFG commitment will bring together and both analyse the situation, but also bring to Parliament and beyond the government's proposals for solutions going forward. Of course, some of the solutions that have already been implemented are, for example, the commitment and the delivery of more affordable homes across the country, as and the areas covered by Mr. Stewart in that regard, but also our commitment, for example, to childcare, the delivery of more of free childcare and the work that Ms Todd is taking forward. All of these different elements are fundamental to the wider question. So we need to look at it as government in the round, and that's exactly what the Population Task Force is doing, and where the population strategy will centre around.
Okay, thanks. And you did also talk about, different areas having different challenges, of course. And as the Minister is aware, there are probably 20 times more migrants in his Edinburgh constituency than my Ayrshire one, where gross value added is only 30% of Edinburgh per capita. So surely to attract migrants and retain people, an inclusive policy, as was touched on by Stuart Millen, to grow the economy is absolutely essential. So how will the Scottish Government address that and the huge divergence within Scotland in terms of our economic base, which is obviously the most important thing when it comes to attracting migrants? It doesn't matter what kind of policies you have vis-a-vis the UK. If you don't actually have the jobs for migrants to go to, they simply won't come here.
Well, when it comes to attracting migrants for certain industries, for example, and some of the prominent industries in rural Scotland, actually the challenge historically, and I say that in terms of recent history, and is also true in the current situation when it comes to, say, for example, agriculture and aspects of the fishing industry, actually attracting people, and indeed in social care in different parts of Scotland as well, actually attracting people is still the issue. So the jobs are there. It's about how do we fill them, without meaning to be repetitive, the Population Task Force looking at government policy as a whole in order to provide the facilities as well as the incentives from a devolved context for people to take up roles in different parts of Scotland that are currently facing either depopulation or really the most acute demographic positioning. Is part of the ongoing work of Scottish Government policy making, but what the task force was, the terms of reference of the task force and how we've been looking at that for the last year. That's where the focus has been, but then also, like I said, the population strategy, which is being led by Ms Hislop, will bring together both the work the Scottish Government has done, but what we still need to do. And I would just highlight again that, of course, in terms of reserved policy, if we were able to design and implement tailored immigration policies from this Parliament, then we could also consider how we, within the rules and criteria of the Scottish visa, we could weight the Scottish visa to different parts of Scotland where the challenge is most acute. And I think the example that Mr Gibson gives between Edinburgh and his constituency is a very powerful one in that regard. Don't know if you want to say anything more about it.
That's sorry.
Rachel, I don't know if you.
I was going to say that's actually very helpful, actually, Minister. But you talked about migration from the UK, but of course, migration from the UK is sometimes, not always people from 18 to 30. In fact, in my constituency, many of them are actually elderly, retired people who go to enjoy the coast and the islands and the beautiful scenery. And they, of course, can outbid local residents, and they clearly have an impact on local health and other services. In fact, some of them come to Scotland for that as well, as you will be aware. As we saw this week in Uist, where the very survival of the Gaelic culture is threatened, incomers are displacing many Indigenous communities. And I'm just wondering, given the Scottish Government's commitment to tailor-made solutions, how is this issue being addressed?
Well, of course, that is an issue that's part of Mr Stewart's portfolio in principle, but I can give Mr Gibson reassurance that myself and Mr Stewart have already discussed that issue in terms of my portfolio in the round, and the Scottish Government will continue to examine the housing challenge that has been emphasised in the example that Mr Gibson gave, but is also pertinent to the wider question of how do we sustain our rural and island communities in an affordable way, as well as how do we attract people there of working age population to deliver and to continue to take those communities forward.
Very much for that, Minister. I just wanted to, as we wind up, to cover a couple of specific areas that we've not really covered in any depth yet. One is our universities, which obviously are suffering significant challenges at the moment as a result of COVID. So can I ask what impact you consider the new immigration proposals, including the graduate route, may have on international students choosing to study in Scotland, and what you're doing to promote Scotland as a destination of choice to international students? And the second area is something that myself and the committee have focused on quite a bit, which is the impact of UK government proposals on international festivals. You had a festival summit looking at the challenges around that on the 26th of February 2020, just before the lockdown. I understand that both the UK and the Welsh governments were in attendance along with cultural stakeholders, and could I ask you what the outcome was of that summit and how that outcome has been taken forward?
Thank you. With regard to the student population, and as the Expert Advisory Group report emphasised from a UK perspective, but has also been emphasised in previous figures, the attraction of the student population is not only beneficial for our universities and the contribution they make to the local economy when they're here, but also that many of those students stay, including from the rest of the UK. So it's important that we continue to attract people here to our universities. I would say in terms of the international student population, since the post-study work visa was removed by the May government in 2012, the Scottish Government has emphasised to the UK Government for its re-implementation. So we welcome the post-study graduate route that has been committed to by the UK Government, and we're glad it's happened and wish it had happened sooner. It won't be in force this year, so students graduating will not benefit from it this year, but from next year it will start to take hold, and that is beneficial because we want people who are training here and skilled to stay and work in our economy. Mr Lockhead is engaged on a regular basis, as I'm sure you can appreciate, with the University of Scotland and the wider higher and further education sector on how do we continue to attract people to study here from the UK, rest of the UK, from the EU in the changing circumstances and internationally. That work is ongoing on a regular basis in terms of working collaboratively with the universities to help them in promoting Scotland, and of course our hubs across Europe and our international work plays an important part in that, working alongside other agencies, including the UK government, in good faith in many regards. So that work continues. I'd be happy to provide to engage with Mr Lockhead and provide further information on that in writing as well, if that would be useful for the committee.
That would be very helpful, thank you.
So happy to do that. With regard to the festival summit, I think it was a good summit, and Ms Hislop was glad to see it happen. It was unfortunate that UK government engagement wasn't what we hoped it would be, but it was a very meaningful discussion with the international festivals in particular. But I would say that the festival visa issue is broad. It can be from everything from not just the Edinburgh International Festivals, but local festivals, particular events and conferences. We make it very difficult for people to come here to showcase their work or give lectures or contribute to the wider understanding and knowledge and culture and well-being of Scotland and the UK as a whole. I had some good discussions with Caroline Noakes about this previously, and she was understanding of it. I think there's a lot of progress to make, and it will require the Home Office to see the need to be less prohibitive in people being able to come here and showcase their work, and that work goes on, and the government continues to make the case to the UK government.
So can I just interrupt you there? I was told that UK government participated in that summit, and you've said that their engagement was not what you had hoped. It sounds to me as if they didn't participate and they haven't agreed to bring forward any recommendations. Could
I know that there was Home Office representation. I'm unclear whether there was ministerial representation. So it was just at official level, right. Which was unfortunate. So there wasn't ministerial level attendance from the UK government. But we continue to make the case to the UK government to introduce changes to the UK visa and immigration system as a whole to make sure that it meets the needs. And that will be of our festivals and our wider cultural sector, because that will be extremely important as a part of making sure that our festivals can recover once we're through the COVID crisis, and our cultural sector as a whole. But I would just highlight that it's also relevant to lecturers coming to give talks at universities, for example. We've had a range of different challenges when it comes to visitor visas for business or culture. I don't know if you want to add anything further to that, Rachel.
I think that the summit identified some policy issues, but also some operational issues as well, and came up with some really good suggestions. So we're keen to pursue those, and we'll certainly be looking to pick those up with the Home Office at official level. Some of them should be fairly straightforward, some of them are more policy related.
Have you publicised the outcomes and the suggestions? Can you share them with the committee?
We can certainly share them.
Yeah, of course we can.
Okay, I would appreciate that, because it is an issue that the committee has looked at, obviously, because it's our cultural remit as well, and the festivals are so important. Do we have any more supplementaries from members? If members are remote, if they can type R in the box, and I think someone will tell me if they've typed R in the box, because I can't see it. Annabelle.
Thank you, Convener. I appreciate time is marching on. So just very briefly, we've only touched on the important issue of the care sector. And just very briefly, I wonder if the Minister could clarify where matters currently stand in the Scottish Government's efforts and desire to see social care workers included in the shortage occupation list. And I understand from the care sector that this is absolutely vital that this happens. And it is, one would have thought, particularly in light of the experience thus far of COVID, that there would be a recognition by the UK government of the fact that these, I would call them angels actually, are key workers. They couldn't be more key, and it's just very disappointing to see the way that the UK government continues to treat these people, but perhaps the Minister could comment briefly.
Thank you. Extremely important question. And as I said earlier, the percentage of care workers, the high percentage of care workers who would not meet the salary threshold of 25,600 is extremely concerning. And the Scottish Care and Donald McCaskill have been very clear that the need for social care to be on the shortage occupation list is utterly compelling, and we have emphasised that in our submission to the MAC with regard to the shortage occupation list. Our submission of 31st August makes that very, very clear. I would just point out too that the UK government introduced a health and care visa, and that was a welcome initiative to an extent. However, bizarrely, it doesn't include social care workers. So it includes doctors and nurses and other social workers, for example, but doesn't include care workers and other people who work for the NHS, like cleaners, for example. So so it gives benefit in terms of cost saving, so not having to pay the health surcharge, for example. I mean, the health surcharge is problematic and unjust as a whole because it's effectively asking people to pay tax for their health and then pay a surcharge too. But that's a wider issue. But the fact that social care workers, as things stand, are not on either the shortage occupation list or part of this health and care visa is astonishing. The UK government have said it was a kind of delayed update to the visa that there would be a potential reimbursement launched from the 1st of October for people who work in the NHS who aren't on the list. But that means these people who've worked through the COVID crisis and made such a huge contribution to the common good, played such an important role, whether it's providing social care or cleaning hospitals or other aspects of the NHS, are then going to have to go through an application process to be reimbursed. It just, it's insulting and makes no sense.
Thank you very much for that and rather depressing conclusion. But thanks to the Minister for coming to give evidence to us today. We have no more supplementary questions, so that concludes our evidence session. The committee will consider the evidence heard in private shortly, and that will conclude the public part of this morning's meeting. Before anyone leaves the room, can I remind members again and witnesses to observe social distancing measures, particularly as they exit the committee room and then across the campus. I'll allow a couple of minutes for members to have a comfort break before we resume in private session. And I now move into private session. Thank you very much.